Nostalgia is one hell of a drug. Scientifically speaking, it's 200% more potent than cocaine. And no one knows this better than Nintendo. Ever since the Wii, they have capitalized on their legacy established since the NES era, by selling their classic games through the Virtual Console on Wii and Wii U. But with that service no longer in sight, soon to be replaced by the Nintendo Classics on Switch, we have seen the NES Classic and Super NES Classic. Two highly desired mini-consoles made for the sole purpose of playing some of their best titles. Because the NES Classic was released in 2016 and the SNES Classic the year after, we sense a pattern here. The Nintendo 64 Classic hasn't been confirmed yet, but thanks to said pattern and the registration of certain patents, we expect an official announcement sooner than later. So with the anticipation of the Nintendo 64 Classic in mind, we're going to go over 10 games in no particular order that we feel should be included in the console. But we hope there are more than 10 games, as this list doesn't even cover half of what we want. Beginning with an obvious one. Super Mario 64 is not only a revolution in 3D game design, but it was also one of the two launch titles for the N64. Super Mario 64 being a launch title on Nintendo's first 3D console caused many people to be excited about the future of gaming in the third dimension. Rather than just take 2D Mario and put him in a 3D space like Crash Bandicoot did, the development team designed 15 different worlds for the players to explore more than once to collect Power Stars. It is a novel concept that 3D Mario games have followed from there on out. Most of the time. We did state in our 64 vs. Sunshine episode of Game vs. Game that Super Mario 64 hasn't aged too well in terms of its controls, but that doesn't excuse just how much of an impact it had on the gaming industry as a whole. It would be criminal to not have this on the Nintendo 64 Classic, but come on, you know it's going to be there, just like this next game. Let's bring in another heavy hitter, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. A lot like Mario, bringing in Zelda to a 3D space was no easy task, having to make sure the 2D goodness of A Link to the Past would translate well to the Nintendo 64. For the most part, it turned out well, only being one of the highest rated games of all time and many fans' favorite game in the series. Who could forget the amazing music, the challenging dungeons, the gut-wrenching story, and the feeling of walking out into Hyrule Field for the very first time? Ocarina of Time's legacy speaks for itself, but what's most important to note is that it will be celebrating its 20th anniversary on November 21st. Not a bad release date for the N64 Classic, if I might add. At this rate, it doesn't look like we'll be getting an HD remaster of the game, unless they've been secretly working on it this whole time for a surprise reveal, so the Nintendo 64 Classic including Ocarina of Time would be a welcome anniversary treat. But would it also include Majora's Mask? The NES Classic had Super Mario Bros. 1 and 3, so it could be possible. For now though, if we had to pick one, we'll just stick with mentioning Ocarina of Time, since it has a far greater legacy. Given that the SNES Classic came with both the first Star Fox and the unreleased Star Fox 2, it's a no-brainer to believe that the Nintendo 64 Classic will include the best Star Fox game. Everyone would agree that Star Fox 64 was the pinnacle of the franchise. It sure helps that there isn't much competition in the best Star Fox game field. Still, this game's quality goes unmatched to this day, and it was released on one of the first 3D game consoles. How crazy is that? With epic space battles and extremely subtle references to Star Wars, Star Fox 64 delivered an arcade space shooter that was different within every playthrough. You could totally beat the game in about an hour, but with so many branching paths, you would be hard-pressed to try and finish every possible combination. There's no denying that the Nintendo 64 Classic will include this gem, but will the GameCube Classic have Star Fox Adventures, Star Fox Assault, or both? These are the questions that truly matter. Originally meant to be another Mario RPG in the vein of Super Mario RPG on the Super NES, it would make sense for Paper Mario to appear on the Nintendo 64 Classic. If I was the same age as I am now when Paper Mario was announced, I probably would have been like, what? Mario, but he's made of paper and it's an RPG? That's silly. then I would have looked stupid, because this was the beginning of an iconic franchise that would reach its peak by the next game and then slowly dwindle to disappointing troughs right after. While it may not be as universally adored as the Thousand Year Door, there is a lot to love with the first Paper Mario game. The story, the turn-based gameplay, it's all there. Seeing as there isn't much competition on the Nintendo 64 in the RPG department, it would be fitting to include Paper Mario to appeal to those fans. You know what we need more than a sports title on the Nintendo 64 Classic? A game featuring Waluigi! So why not kill two birds with one stone and feature the debut game in the Mario Tennis series? You and a group of up to 3 friends would face off in the most intense game of tennis at a 480p resolution. At least it looks way better than Mario's Tennis for the Virtual Boy. All that red, ugh. However, mentioning this game also raises the question on how multiplayer games would function on the Nintendo 64 Classic. For one, the controllers are about as big as an NES Classic, and you'd be able to use up to 4 of them on the Nintendo 64. Perhaps the system will only include 1 controller, and you would have to buy the rest separately. We hope that works out, because we want to play another multiplayer game. Everyone loves Mario Kart. Do you not like Mario Kart? Shut up, you're lying, of course you like Mario Kart. Super Mario Kart on the SNES was cool and all, but this series was made for 3D, and Mario Kart 64 proved that. Even though there have been way better entries after this one, every Mario Kart game is special for different reasons. Gee, I wonder why Double Dash fans like Double Dash so much. Mario Kart 64 may not have the best graphics, but compensates with its nearly flawless use of the Nintendo 64 controller, some of the best tracks and gameplay in the series, introduced the 150cc speed level, and the accursed Spiny, and quickly renamed it to Blue Shell. On top of that, Mario Kart 64 had an excellent battle mode and true victory ceremonies in front of Royal Raceway's Peach's Castle. This one could even be explored from the outside. And this is another thing about Mario Kart 64. Its stages such as Bowser's Castle, Toad's Turnpike, Wario Stadium, and finally Rainbow Road are some of the longest in the series. In fact, the Rainbow Road is so long that in Mario Kart 8 they decide to make the entire race one lap around that massive track. Okay, calm down guys, calm down. We know how much of a reputation Donkey Kong 64 has as being not as good as you might remember. Sure, it's long and the collectible system can be rather tedious, but as we've stated before, the classic systems are meant for nostalgic purposes, and there are some games on each classic system that aren't the cream of the crop. Hell, the NES Classic had Castlevania II Simon's Quest, are you kidding me? So if the Nintendo 64 Classic is going to have one less than stellar game, it's gotta be Donkey Kong 64. Other than the fact that Donkey Kong is the Nintendo icon next to Mario, this game has that charm that only the developers at Rare could provide. Think of Donkey Kong 64 as a Banjo-Kazooie game, only with more characters, longer levels, an insane amount of collectibles, and just, wow, this game is chock full of content, maybe a little too much? I don't know. I personally have a ton of nostalgia for this game, and I even went to the trouble of buying it on the Wii U Virtual Console. It wouldn't surprise me in the end if it doesn't make the cut, but it would still be nice to have on the N64 Classic. Mario Party is a classic, with the franchise hopefully back in shape with Super Mario Party. It wouldn't surprise us if Nintendo decides to include one of the 3 original Mario Parties that were made for the Nintendo 64. But which one should be selected? Mario Party is naturally historical as it was the first game in the series, but has a notorious reputation of ruining the analog stick and even causing cuts and bleedings with its many rotation-based minigames. In 2018, that's a lawsuit in the making. Mario Party 2 is great, but there is no doubt that the most ambitious and thus the Mario Party for the Nintendo 64 Classic should be Mario Party 3. This game was packed with 70 new and mostly solid minigames and costumes based on the themes of the different boards. Mario Party 3 is also renowned for introducing the 2-player duel mode, a playable Princess Daisy, and your favorite, wah! Yes, Waluigi has a board in this game, and it is one of the best in the series. Mario Party 3 on the Nintendo 64 Classic will be a definite win and a great way to represent one of Nintendo's IPs that debuted on the Nintendo 64. Hey, speaking of, No freaking duh. The first Super Smash Bros. Is far from the best entry in the franchise, but it's still the first Super Smash Bros. Game, come on. That has to count for something. And when you're creating the Nintendo 64 Classic, why not put it on there? Super Smash Bros. Was the beginning of a revolution in fighting games, one that was ultimately succeeded 2 years later by Super Smash Bros. Melee. But as expected, it was the first game that solidified that groundwork. Hell, that game somehow even ran at 60 FPS back in 1999. You have no excuse, modern game developers. But even back then, Sakurai had to make some compromises to get this game running at a solid frame rate, which is why the levels aren't as detailed. The character roster is also pretty low, and the only single-player mode is Classic. Super Smash Bros. Was more of a prototype on the Nintendo 64 in order to perfect the formula with Melee on the GameCube, which is why it would be another fitting contender on the Nintendo 64 Classic. Unless they come out with a Game Boy Classic before this, then the Nintendo 64 Classic will be the first retro system to include a Pokemon game. That, of course, being Pokemon Stadium. While it would be also a blast having both this and Pokemon Snap, if we had to choose one, there's no contest. Because this game is all about Pokemon battles in massive venues without any storyline. So no, this is not a Pokemon RPG title, but who cares about that when you have a campaign consisting of only trainer battles and 4 cups totaling up to 80 Pokemon battles. And if that wasn't enough, you also have the Gym Leader Castle mode with all of Kanto's 8 gym leaders, Elite Four, and your rival. After clearing these 2, you got to face Mewtwo, and after that, play a post-game round 2 in both of the 2 main single-player modes, but with different Pokemon and a much higher difficulty setting. The game also has smaller modes like Battle Now and the multiplayer-based Free Battle. Needless to say, Pokemon Stadium is a classic. Maybe not the most polished title in the series, but definitely a packed one. But those are just 10 of the games we want to see on the Nintendo 64 Classic, and we hope that there will be more than that when the system eventually comes out. This console was chock full of great titles, so it's no wonder we couldn't fit them all on this list. So, what games do you want to see come out to the Nintendo 64 Classic? Sound off in the comment section below, or tweet them to us at Common Realm. In the meantime, if you're new, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more videos pertaining to the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo news, and more. We'd also like to thank our patrons, including royal producer Kenyatta Ali, for all their contributions to the realm. If you would like to support us in exchange for some awesome perks such as our metal pins and podcast, visit patreon.com/commonrealm. But in the meantime, girls and guys, we will see you in the next one.